What's good? What's the play, family? It's your boy Christian Mingles, CT, whatever you want to call me, here with a solo video project for you guys. All right, so we dropped a video Tuesday, which is today. This will probably come out a little bit later. But Brian dropped his NFL Weekly Recap, our first solo project. We had discussed this over the past weekend about the guys taking on solo projects if they're willing. Of course, I didn't want anybody to feel like they're forced to do anything, but just to be able to have different type of content on the channel where guys are able to dive into things that they want to talk about just themselves, or it could be small groups where they feel like they're not having to minimize their words, because in a 1 hour podcast setting, a lot of times there are a lot of topics that we want to cover, but we aren't always able to cover all the topics or aren't able to go as in depth as the individual would like to go. So this solo content, these shorter form videos where we are able to talk directly to the audience and get all our thoughts out at once. I told the guys it'll be very difficult though, because talking 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes straight, no breaks, no one to play off of, it'll be a little bit different, a little bit more difficult, but interested to see where it goes. So already discussed, Brian's video that came out. Excellent video. He was the first one to really step up and say that he was interested. He said he would do it. And you can always rely on Brian. We call him the podcast leader for a reason, podcast president. He's always standing on time and standing on business. He told me he would have a video done. He had it done when he said he was going to have it done. That's why you can always rely on Brian. And he even got a little creative with it. He had the stat ticker at the bottom, just different stuff like that. I doubt my video is going to be that creative. Mine is probably going to be a little bit more cut and dry just because I'm not as equipped with all the edits and stuff that people like Brian and Caleb are. But I'm still interested to see where we can take this to go forward. All right. So just to start, title of this will probably be Diary of a Sad Washington Commander Fan. Today was a trade deadline, if you don't know, NFL trade deadline, of course. And the Commanders made some moves. They kind of threw it in for this season. And I think they realized that the team being mediocre over the past few years, the trend was probably going to continue. You still have a young quarterback in Sam Howell. I'll talk about him a little bit later. But the two star edge rushers, Montez Sweat and Chase Young, were both moved. Montez Sweat was traded for a second rounder to the Bears. I'll talk about that one later. But Chase Young to the 49ers for a conditional third round pick. I think it was revealed that it'll be a compensatory pick. So we got rid of Chase Young, who was arguably on pace for his best season in his career, for a compensatory third round pick. And I don't know about you, but I feel like the value that we could have gotten does not necessarily reflect what was received in the actual trade. I understand that Chase Young has had injury history. He missed an entire season with a torn ACL. Didn't look regular, didn't look normal when he came back last year, but he was still making an impact. When he came in this season, he missed the first game, and then he came back and started dominating, having the best year of his career so far, I would say. Had multiple games where he was just getting to the quarterback, getting pressures. He was actually, finishing these pressures and getting the sacks. That was really the issue over the past couple years of his career when he was healthy. The first year he had 7.5 sacks. That was cool, rookie year. But in the second year, the pressures went down, the sack count went down, and he ended up getting hurt. So that's the one thing with Chase Young that had been the issue, but he was making the plays this year, getting the sacks and getting the pressures, of course. But the team wasn't having success at the same time. There was an article that came out that said that the Commanders viewed getting rid of Chase Young as potentially addition by subtraction. All right. And I can tell you that Casey Tuhill is a solid edge rusher. James Smith-Williams, very versatile, solid edge rusher. So, I don't think the defense, which was already ranked 31st in the NFL, is going to completely fall off a cliff. But considering that you have a 24-year-old edge rusher who's having a career year right now, who is about to strike big in free agency as long as he keeps up this pace, I don't feel like the value that we received reflects the type of season that he has and the type of season he is having and the type of career that he could have down the line. This is a 24-year-old edge rusher who scouts have said that has all the potential in the world, and we were finally really starting to see him put together the pass rush traits that we knew he had onto the field. And they moved him at the deadline for a 3rd round pick. That'll probably be in the 90 range. And I have no issue with, stacking picks in the top 100. I know that's a thing coming into the draft season. But, the Chase Young just for a 3rd round pick, I don't feel like we got the value that was needed. And I don't feel like we were in a scenario where we had to trade him. I feel like teams understood that the Commanders felt like they were negotiating against themselves at this point. Because Chase Young, I understand that this may be a tank move, but Chase Young isn't winning you games by himself. He hasn't been able to do that the past few games. We haven't been able to string together wins. He hasn't been able to do it by himself, even though he's been playing pretty well. So I don't think that having Chase Young on the roster would necessarily stop you from being, whatever bottom feeder team that you want to be. Of course, you would have to pay him at the end of the season, but this is a premier edge rusher who's only 24 years old. I don't see the issue with paying the edge rusher who has been producing as a top-tier edge rusher does. I understand trying to get the draft picks, trying to rebuild from scratch, but I feel like they may have big-brained themselves on this one. You have a 24-year-old, I'm going to keep stressing that point, 24 years old edge rusher having his best year of his career, and you get rid of him for the 3rd round pick. I do feel like I would feel a little bit differently about this trade if the value was better, maybe if it was a 2nd rounder, maybe even, of course, you would love to get a late 1st rounder at the least. But for the Niners to give us a pick in the 90s, I don't think that reflects the value that Chase Young offers, and you can just say it's a head-scratching move. And then the Montez Sweat trade. Coming into today, I feel like most Commander fans knew that either Chase or Montez would be moved. After the game, the sense was it would most likely be Montez and Chase was probably safe. So the Montez trade really did not catch me off guard. I am a little bit surprised that we were able to get the 2nd round pick for him from the Bears especially. I feel like that'll be a great pick for us. Likely top 40, top 45 at worst pick for an edge rusher who was going to be a free agent who they definitely weren't going to pay. I feel like coming into the season, we knew that it was either going to be Chase or Montez that would get the money. I feel like Chase, over the past few games, was showing that he deserved the payday. And Montez is a little bit older than Chase, so you could see that maybe they weren't too sold on giving him the full long-term contract that you would give up to that edge rusher of his potential, considering all the money that's already given to the D-line with John Allen, Deron Payne, stuff like that. So I was expecting this trade. I wasn't expecting the return, though, so I could say that I was pleasantly surprised by getting the 2nd round pick. There were reports that, Atlanta had a 3rd round pick on the table that could become a 2nd round pick if he signed an extension. But the Bears just outright gave us a 2nd round pick, and that 2nd round pick would likely be better than the pick the Falcons gave us anyway. So I can say that this trade is a win for Washington in a way, because you're still losing Pro Bowl level player. It's a lot of Pro Bowl level edge rushers, but at the end of the day, somebody who makes the type of impact Montez Sweat has, I think he has 6.5 sacks on the season so far. Anybody who makes that type of impact, I feel like that's a Pro Bowl level player. So you're losing that, but you're still getting a top 40 pick in return. So I'm not too upset about it. The trades in tandem, though, is what makes me upset. I feel like one or the other could have just got the job done enough, but trading both, and it really felt like the 2nd trade came out of nowhere. You start to hear rumblings that Chase Young could be moved, but for him to actually be moved at the point and the value that we received back does not feel like a good move for the Commanders. I understand that the new ownership wants to come in and make, put their mark on things, but I could see a different way of doing things. I understand that this is the Sixers ownership, Josh Harris. So he's from the trust the process era where, picks. That was the value. In the NFL, when you have that stud edge rusher, it's very difficult to find those type of players, that raw athlete. I said earlier that we had 2 world-class athletes. And for the Commanders, that's a rarity, honestly, especially at that edge rush position. To have 2 world-class athletes, Montez Sweat, 6'6", 4'4", 40. Chase Young, you don't even have to explain it, just a top-tier athlete. And just trade them same day within 4 hours. It doesn't seem like it makes sense. Seems like it's really working backwards, because then you're going to have to eventually replace that type of, talent on that front line. And this does push the playoff window back. The past couple years, the Commanders have honestly been, like I said earlier, a mediocre team. But you could honestly say that throughout at least week 15, 16, 17, they've always had a fighter's chance to get into the playoffs. And it could still be the same this season, but I think going forward, I feel like the goal for the team may not necessarily be to make the playoffs. And I can appreciate that in a sense, because I feel like the playoffs, getting there and then losing in the first round doesn't really serve that much of a purpose. But for the team where it was at, and to have the talent that we had, I felt like this was one of the better put together rosters that we've had in my life. Honestly, the team has never been that good. I'm 22 years old. The team has never been that good. But to have 4 first rounders on the D-line, the receivers that we had, the running back room that's decent, could get better. First rounder at linebacker, first rounder in the defensive backfield, and Emmanuel Forbes, who hasn't panned out so far. The talent and the draft capital that we put into this team, I feel like this is one of the better teams that I've seen put together on the actual football field. And it just has not worked. And trading the players almost feels like, you're feeling like it was on them in a way. I feel like the better move, you can trade. I understand it's very difficult to pay both edge rushers. I feel like if you pay Chase Young, then if you're deciding that you're going to pay Chase Young, trade Montez. You got the second round pick for him. It's cool. I feel like the coaches need to be held accountable at some point. And this is year 4 of the Ron Rivera era. We were told that it was a new Rivera when he got hired, and it surely was. And any Commander fan you talk to is practically calling for his job. And I feel like him being able to be involved in these type of decisions continuously, it's borderline, makes you go insane. Because it feels like he's in a lame duck year. It's almost like he's not going to be here going forward, but they're still letting him be involved in these type of decisions. Marty Herney and Martin Mayhew, they're probably gone soon too. I feel like the ownership group wants to get their own guys in there, but they're still the ones making the decision. And I don't think this was the best decision to make, but we don't have to harp on that any longer. Let's look at the future for the Commanders. So you got the second round pick for Montez Sweat, and you got the conditional third round pick for Chase Young. So it's 2 second rounders, 2 third rounders, and a first round pick. So potentially 5 picks in the top 100, maybe even 4 picks in the top 80, and then another pick in the top 100. Ideally, you'd like to hit on at least 4 of those picks, having 4 quality starters on your team within the next 2 years, just because you traded away these edge rushers for them. So you would think that you would make sure that you hit on these picks. As long as this current group, Ron Rivera, Marty Herney, Martin Mayhew, is out, I would feel pretty comfortable about the drafting, no matter who they bring in. Ron Rivera's drafting strategy is a bit perplexed. He drafts based off a lot of personality with the guys. Family background is often mentioned whenever he makes a pick. So that whole way of drafting, I'd like to see just head out the door. Thank you for your service, but time to bring in some new people. So the goal for the Commanders should honestly be to bring in some young talent who can help instantly on the offensive line. And at this point, you probably need defensive line help too, because you would still like to have the stud edge rushers. We still have the interior pass rush with John Allen, Deron Payne. And then the defensive backfield, they've already spent a first-round pick on Emmanuel Forbes. I don't know how likely they'd be to go back to the well again next year, drafting a defensive back early. They drafted Quan Martin in the second round, who I feel like they want to be their nickel guy of the future. I think they thought he was going to be ready this year. I don't think he is yet. So hopefully Quan Martin can come in next year and be the nickel guy that they're looking for. Cam Curl, I hope he gets paid, because he's been a 7th round gem from 2020. Derek Forrest, solid free safety. Wasn't having as good of a season last year as he was this year. Hope he gets back soon to get back on track. Kendall Fuller. Kendall Fuller is a free agent. I do not know if they will bring him back. I feel like the whole point of drafting Emmanuel Forbes was so you felt comfortable letting Kendall Fuller walk. But the way that Emmanuel Forbes has played so far, I don't know if you feel comfortable letting Kendall Fuller walk. St. Jude's solid corner through and through. Big body, able to guard most receivers and keep up with most receivers. He does get beat here and there. But all in all, for a number 2 corner, he's pretty solid. You really wanted Forbes to step into that number 1 role as a number 1 corner. And if he's not ready to do that, if you don't feel like he's ready to do that by next season, you probably either are trying to bring Kendall Fuller back or you're targeting another cornerback in the draft. So that's where the defense stands. Linebacker, I'm not really big on spending early picks on the linebacker position. We did that, I want to say 2 years ago when we drafted Jamin Davis in the first round. He's been a solid linebacker. This is the defense, a bunch of solid players that I could say are honestly not often put in the best position to succeed. They paid Cody Barton this offseason, who before he got hurt was a disappointment. They let Cole Holcomb walk, who had been a solid, steady linebacker. And they let him walk. They brought in Cody Barton, who was a 1-year starter, I believe, with the Seahawks, and paid him off that one season. Has struggled in coverage, struggled in run support, and they were able to, bring him in the offseason, and they felt like this was the answer at linebacker. They made him the Mike linebacker. He wore the green dot. He got hurt. So now David Mayo is getting minutes, and any Commander fan will tell you that David Mayo should be retired. So David Mayo subbed in for Cody Barton in the game Barton got hurt. And he had the green dot on his helmet, so he played over Jamin Davis. So just stuff like that where the team just is subbing in these backup players who clearly are not ready to play. David Mayo, I hope, this is last season with us, hopefully. But the linebacker position, you maybe want to bring in one more guy who you trust, somebody who starts over Cody Barton. Maybe this one guy could be the true Mike linebacker, but sounds better in theory because who knows with this team. The D-line, honestly, I like Toohill. I like James Smith-Williams. I could say that you probably give them the rest of the season to try to see and evaluate what they can do in a full season. Because in their, spot starts or just rotating in and out, they play pretty decently. We drafted Andre Jones and KJ Henry from Clemson this past offseason. Both have been on and off practice squad or active on the roster, I believe. So neither of them have really gotten a heavy amount of playing time. So we'll probably see them going into the later half of this season. So that's the defense. D-line, you know what you get from the interior defenders. You want to evaluate Toohill and James Smith-Williams, and then the other two that we drafted. Linebacker, Jamin Davis, solid. You probably want to bring somebody else in who could actually help him consistently throughout the season. Defensive backs, depending on how Forrest plays this latter half of the season, that'll determine whether or not Kendall Fuller is brought back, most likely. And then you hope Quan Martin can step into that nickel role. The other two safeties, you know what you're getting for the most part. All right, the offensive side of the ball. This is where things get a bit more interesting because you think it's a little bit more steady just by looking at the names. But the O-line has struggled heavily, so you often do not get to see what the offense itself would look like. The offensive line needs to be revamped, point blank and period. Charles Leno has been, he's been solid, but at the same time, he has just timely mistakes that we can't have for the left tackle protecting the quarterback. Right tackle, Andrew Wiley has been a awful signing this past free agency. Right guard, Sam Cosmi has been solid. He has been beat a few times in a few games, but other games he's been a stilt. So it's like back and forth for him. Just hope to see more consistency. The center position, they drafted Ricky Stromberg in the 3rd round, paid Nick Gates in free agency. By week 8, Tyler Larson is the starting center. Tyler Larson, he was steady for us last year. They benched Nick Gates, and they don't trust Stromberg yet, I believe. So Tyler Larson is the guy for the rest of the season. Depending on how he plays, you may just say, you know what, Tyler Larson, you can have the job. Left guard. this is where it gets a bit crazy. Sadiq Charles, who has been on the team for a few years now, won the left guard job in training camp over Chris Paul. Chris Paul, not that Chris Paul. Chris Paul, our left guard, who is now the starter. Sadiq Charles got hurt, but I do feel like a change needed to be made there anyway. Sadiq Charles is getting beat consistently. Andrew Wiley, of course, at right tackle, who I feel like is honestly more of a guard. He's also getting beat consistently. The center, Nick Gates, was getting beat consistently. So the revamped O-line against the Eagles honestly held up pretty well. Leno, Chris Paul, Tyler Larson, Sam Cosmi, Andrew Wiley held up pretty good. But going forward next season, there just need to be multiple new faces on this O-line. I could say at least 3 positions need to be swapped, Certainly the center position, whether it's Larson who wins the job, but it can't be Nick Gates. Either Larson needs to win the job or Stromberg needs to take the job because he's a 3rd-round pick. Left guard, it cannot be Sadiq Charles again coming into the season. Depending on how Chris Paul plays, maybe he has a chance to win it next offseason. Cannot be Sadiq Charles. Maybe you bring somebody in as a free agent. And that's that. Right tackle, Andrew Wiley. I don't know how we can move off of his contract or not, but he needs to be either a swing tackle, moving to guard or something, or we bring in a new right tackle completely. I'd like to see them look towards the draft to bring in a left tackle who may play at right tackle for now, but that's just where I stand with that. Leno is solid. Depending on the contract status, really determines whether he'll be back or not. But for him to be the best O-lineman that we have, like the clear best lineman, the O-line needs a revamp, and they need it back. Tight end, Logan Thomas, he's been solid this season, honestly, it surprised me. But I can say that I do not want to see him as a starting tight end next year. I don't feel like he's dynamic enough, and I'm going to use that word again at another position, but I don't feel like he's been dynamic enough. He's not much of an athlete at the tight end position who catch the easy passes. He's not really going to do much else for you. So that's how I feel on the Logan Thomas point. But he's been a steady vet, good vet in the locker room. I believe the tight end say he leads the tight end room well as well. So, other than the on-field lack of athleticism, sure, he's a good guy. Wide receiver position, Terry Jahan, 1 and 2. Honestly feel bad for Terry because it seems that we're entering a rebuild, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a chance that he's moved this offseason. Just because, maybe ownership doesn't want to pay a wide receiver that type of money on a bad team. But Terry and Jahan, as of now, coming into the next season, 1 and 2. You probably give Diami the rest of the season, depending on how serious his Curtis Samuel injury is, of course. But Curtis Samuel did get hurt in the Eagles game, missed the rest of the game. Jamison Crowder honestly played most of the slot touches. But coming into next season, I don't think you bring back Curtis Samuel. I think depending on whether you have Diami or another outside guy that you sign in free agency, I'd like to see Jahan move towards the slot more. I feel like he's more of a slot guy and would be able to win more matchups from the slot. So maybe having Jahan in the slot would benefit us, and having a true outside receiver opposite Terry would probably open up some things for not only offense but for Jahan himself. He was struggling to get some targets throughout the first few weeks of the season. He just broke out against the Eagles this past week. But I would be interested to see what Jahan is able to do in the slot more often. Running back. B-Rob, whenever he's gotten the touches, whenever he's going, he's a good steady running back. I believe this past week against the Eagles, he had the longest run of his career. I believe it was around 30 yards. But the backfield is not dynamic. And that's not a shot at B-Rob, but I just don't know if he is the true bell cow that we're looking for. I don't think the other option would be to go into free agency. I don't believe heavily in paying a running back that much. But there needs to be a, change of pace, something. But I don't know if Brian Robinson is the bell cow back that we are looking for. I do think that Antonio Gibson was the guy that they thought was going to do that, but it just hasn't been there. Outside of the fumbles, he's not really getting the touches that they're looking for. In the passing game, he's taking the screens, 10 yards, It's not much real change of pace when he's in the game. So maybe you look in free agency for that change of pace guy without breaking the bank for like a top tier running back. Maybe you find that guy in the second, third round of the draft. But I do think there needs to be at least one other person with B-Rob, not just him as a bell cow in that backfield, because I feel like the way this is going, Antonio Gibson will likely be gone. And Chris Rodriguez had a pretty good game a couple weeks ago against the Giants, but I'd still be interested to see them bring somebody else in to, just add a spark to the backfield. Quarterback. If you know me, you know that I am a Sam Howell truther. Coming into the previous draft where he was a prospect, he was my QB1 over quarterbacks like Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Matt Corral. That take is aging pretty decently. Brock Purdy out of that class was playing pretty good in the Shanahan system. But as of late, he's looked a bit questionable. Sam Howell has been steady. He's rose to the occasion for most games. He has had a couple stinkers, but he's a young quarterback. And for the most part, outside of, taking sacks and the interceptions, you see the process of him correcting the mistakes that he's making. You see him not falling into the same sacks. You see him throwing the ball away more often. We saw it a lot against the Eagles. He was getting rid of it once he realized that there was nothing there. He's throwing the ball away. You also see him not forcing the ball into windows that aren't there. The Eagles interception, the route was open, overthrew him just by a little bit for Terry. Honestly, still a catch that Terry may have been able to make, but it wasn't a great ball by Sam. Floated a little bit. Reed Blankenship was able to get the interception. So a lot of the interceptions, the sacks, we're seeing that he's processing it better, being able to correct his mistakes, not forcing anything over the middle where it's not there. He was really doing that a lot at the beginning of the season, forcing the ball over the middle. And he was able to convert a lot of third and longs at the beginning of the season because he was really looking at the middle of the field. And I think teams started to pick up on that, so they would close up that middle of the field on those third and longs. A lot of those would lead up to interceptions. That Bills game was horrendous, and it started off with a middle of the field interception. But since that Bills game, he's really corrected the mistakes, has really locked in, has really been able to get the job done. Going into next season and the rest of the season, I'm still looking forward to his development. I do not think that this team is a team that needs to draft a quarterback unless they have the first overall pick in the draft. Caleb Williams, a quarterback, I don't think you can just act like it's not there at number one. But if we're, around 10, 11, 9, 8, around that realm of the draft, I don't think you force yourself into taking a quarterback. Outside of Caleb, Drake May, I like Michael Penix, but I don't know if he is a better prospect than Sam Howell right now. So outside of those two, I don't think you force yourself to take a quarterback, build up the roster around him. And if Sam isn't the guy going forward, you have the opportunity with a good roster to go find that real quarterback. But this is a team that has been searching for a quarterback my entire lifetime. We thought we had it with RG3, thought we had it with Kirk Cousins. RG3 got injured, didn't work out down the line. Kirk Cousins, he didn't pay, has seemingly become one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL over the past few seasons. Hope he heals quickly from that torn Achilles. But you may have really lucked into a guy in Sam Howell. You had Carson Wentz on the roster last year. Taylor Heineke was the backup. He had Sam Howell as the third-string quarterback, basically as the practice squad quarterback going against the starting defense. And a lot of the guys were saying that last year they were surprised that, he wasn't getting more looks. But this season he's proving that he's pretty decent. And he may be making my QB1 take from the 2022 class age gracefully. You never know. Things can change. Different things can happen. But for Sam Howell, I think, he knows what he needs to work on in this offseason. And I'd like to see what he looks like after a full offseason, after having a full season as a starting quarterback. I'm hoping that he can start to stay upright, not taking as many sacks, avoiding the sacks that, he does not need to take. But going forward, I think we may have our guy, honestly, but that only depends on what the ownership group wants to do and if Sam can continue to develop, He has to continue to go this way for the rest of the season. Continue to step up to the occasion, no matter what the team around him is doing. As long as the O-line can, build on the performance from this Eagles game, I think Sam will have a great chance to build on the performances. Right, so that's the roster. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the coaching staff. Not too much, because I've already said I'm hoping that the result of this season will be Ron Rivera being out of town. I think Jack Del Rio will be gone with him. Eric Bieniemy is a little bit questionable because I'd say this season, half good games, half bad games, based off play calling. And I don't really know the way he is managing. He would be managing a locker room. That's why I would honestly like to see him get a few games at the end of the season as the interim coach. But I don't know how likely it is that they fire Ron Rivera. But for Bieniemy, it's truly about whether or not he can get his offense locked into what he wants it to be, balance the run and the pass more, and whether or not he can manage the locker room. So I'd like to see him get a few games at the end of the season as the interim coach. But going forward into next season, there's honestly not much of a sense around who they may be interested in, or if Eric Bieniemy may be the guy who took the job. That was the belief before the season. During the season, it has become a big question. But looking forward to seeing how they address that going forward. Of course, need a new head coach, new general manager, all that stuff that is already locked in. Hoping that the ownership group is hearing the complaints of the fans, hearing and seeing the results on the field are not acceptable, and hopefully that they correct these errors going forward. Dan Snyder regime was a long 20 plus years. Hopefully this regime can get things back on the up and up coming soon. But that was just, diary from a sad Commanders fan. Chase Young's gone, Montez is gone, same day. But it's all right. We got a rest of the season coming up. Maybe we finish 5-12, 6-11. That may be what they're aiming for at this point. But that's that. Hopefully there's more optimism around the team going into the next offseason that's not just around the new ownership. Hopefully it's around the actual team. Hopefully there's positive buzz. That's all from me. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Just a little quick breakdown of the Commanders' offense, defense, coaching staff, front office. And be sure to stay tuned for the next play.